It seems to me that what's happening today is exactly what George Orwell forecast in his famous book 1984. In Britain, we haven't had an attack of Al-Qaeda or anybody else. Yet we've got concrete blocks around Parliament, we're talking about ID cards, we've got people locked up in Belmarsh. People are being conditioned in exactly the Orwell sense to be fearful and to do what the government says.
I have a child and I'm afraid for my child very much.
Of course, major acts of terrorism have happened in the United States, in Spain and in other countries. But the question is, are governments pursuing policies which are reducing the risk of terrorism, or are their counter-terror policies actually increasing the risk of terrorism? Here in Britain, we know from one of the inquiries into the Iraq War that Tony Blair was told by British intelligence just a month before the invasion of Iraq that invading Iraq would actually heighten the risk of terrorism by Al-Qaeda, yet he still went ahead.
It may be difficult to believe, but in the Intelligence and Security Committee report, which is a public document available on the internet, it states quite plainly that in February 2003, just 1 month before the invasion of Iraq, the Joint Intelligence Committee, JIC, warned Tony Blair that Al-Qaeda posed the greatest threat to the West, and that invading Iraq would heighten the risk of terrorist attacks. The policies followed by the British government since September the 11th have not made us safer. They have actually increased the risk of terrorism. There is another way of dealing with terrorism.
Religion. I think a lot of it is envy. Envy of the West. I think it's envy.
Well, because they all think that they're right. I think that they're trying to enforce their religion on other people.
Because they're disillusioned with the way the world's going.
Well, I think it's because they want us to listen. But they want us to stop and think about what it's like for them to share, really. We're quite wealthy in the Western world. And to stand up and listen to what they want.
Maybe the way they've been destroyed by the American governments, or some. Maybe the way they've been destroyed in their home. That's why they have to be. That is it.
It's a backlash to the way the Americans are sort of storming the world, basically.
Basically because we interfere or get involved, I guess, in places where we have no right to be.
I think probably someone becomes terrorist because they feel there's probably no other option. And I think terrorism comes from oppression.
Well, poverty has a lot to do with it. I think if you're put into a position where you feel you have no control over your life, then that's going to push you into a position of taking control back, and that would be terrorism.
As far as why do people do what they do, well, it can be injustice, of course it can be injustice. I would never believe that that justifies the sort of action that was taken against many thousands of innocent people. That must be wrong. But yes, I think the Palestinian situation is instrumental in recruiting the sorts of people that will go to the extremes that happened on that day. But I also think that there are people out there who are fundamentally bad. I'm not saying they're fundamentally Islamic or fundamentally Christian, they're fundamentally bad.
You make anybody desperate. Anybody who's desperate and he can't see that there's any other way he or she can really get out of it.
Well, I think the September the 11th attack is probably, it was undoubtedly religious. I mean, the testimony of the people who died and the strength they're behind, clearly they thought that this was the right thing to do, they would go to God and so on. So I think that's a major factor, the absolute conviction that you're totally right unto God. But I think many other acts of terror, and this may have been part of it, were political indignation under suppression, economic deprivation, no other way of resolving the problem, and so on. These are, I think, motivations behind terror. Absolute indignation. I mean, after all, when the Nazis occupied most of Europe, we were busy supporting people who blew up trains and killed civilians, maybe by accident, but anyway, they did it. And so I think that political indignation is a major factor behind people who take to what we call terror.
Those people who say that Islam is the religion of terror, they don't know about Islam.
Well, it's absolute nonsense, it's wrong. And you're right, people come to me and say that to me. The fact that you say you're a Christian often doesn't mean you're carrying out the contract. The fact that you say that you're Islamic, you're Muslim, it doesn't mean that you're following the purposes and principles of the Islamic faith.
Even the jihad is very conveniently translated. Jihad is a term which is used in the Quran and as Prophet saying many times, and the real sense of jihad is striving to achieve the best in you, morally, socially, and everything. There's an incident when Prophet and his companions were coming back from a battle, and on the way back the Prophet said to the people that now we are going to the bigger jihad from the smaller jihad. So they said, what? Is there a bigger enemy, bigger forces? He said, no. The bigger jihad is to control yourself, your own desires. So that's the jihad. So jihad has got a very wide meaning. You compare Geneva Convention with the philosophy of war or rules and regulations of war in Islam, then it will be very clear to you that in war should not be, first of all, the person who is in dispute with you, you have to offer them peace, discussion and everything. You cannot just fight anybody without declaring that you are against them. And you can't kill old people, the priests, you can't demolish the prayer place, children, women, all kinds of things. You can't even cut the trees.
I think people who say that Islam is a religion of terror are talking absolute cobblers. There isn't an Islam. There's a whole millions of people who follow something that the Prophet said. And within that spectrum, there are as wide diversions as there are in the Catholic Church or in the Christian community or in the Jewish community especially. Enormous diversions. I mean, I live in a very Muslim area, I suppose, in North London, where we have many Turks and many Kurds and so on and so on. There's no question of terror. They're ordinary civilian citizens doing their daily work.
So please, for God's sake, try to understand it.